This is the lecture for ancient medieval history for Wednesday, the 5th. No, it's the 4th. Of course, May the 4th be with you. Of May 2022. And last time we talked about the feudal order. What you need to remember about the feudal order is that, with the exception of people in towns, everyone was born into a role of personal obligation. Everyone. You think the kings are free? No. If you're born into royalty, you're born into a family business that you really can't escape. And your job is to be a public person and a leader and to take the responsibility for everything that goes on in your country. Something that you really can't control beyond a certain point. So, the kings and queens, I'm sure you have your notes in. There they are. The kings and queens are just as trapped, or as fulfilled, depending upon your point of view, by their roles as are the lowliest serf. Now, obviously, they have a different job. But serfs are born to work the land. Kings are born to rule the land. And everyone in between is born to do a particular job. What if you're not suited to that job? You do it anyway. But there is an exception. And the exception is life in the towns. In the towns, you could get a job, and if you were skilled at it and hardworking and were fortunate enough to be approved of by the guild, you could make a living. Even if your background is poor as dirt, as surfy as the coast of Maine, the fact remains that your skills and your choices, your abilities will determine your fate if you live in the towns to a much greater extent than anywhere else. So people are born into a system of obligations that goes all the way up to the Lord God Almighty and all the way down to beasts and the natural world. You're born into a role. Your job is to fulfill that role, not to find your destiny. You all, just as I did, have a more difficult and more interesting job. Instead of being born to be something or other, you have the option that freedom affords. You can choose your destiny. Now, will you achieve every dream that you've ever had? Hell no. Or if you do, I'll be really jealous. But what you will do is have the chance. That's all you get. In a free society like ours, you get the opportunity to go after your dreams in a way that people in slave societies like North Korea or China or even Venezuela don't get. If you're not born one of the elite in those countries, forget about it. You're going to do what everyone tells you for your whole life, and then you die. In this society, you get to choose. And, oh God, how many people whinge and complain about how their lives turned out? Daytime television is filled with shows with people who have no real problems, complaining about how miserable their lives are. Here's a hint. In America, sometimes your life is going to be miserable. It's your fault. Fix it. But I didn't make my life miserable. Well, maybe you didn't start it. But you're not doing anything about it. Fix it. That's the thing about being free. You are not an arrow shot by your birth on a ballistic trajectory somewhere. You are a bird flying through the air. And you can choose to go with the wind, against the wind, go higher, go lower. You may make decisions that will lead to you crashing or going into a window. Thank you, Dan.
Airplane.
Yeah, you could meet an airplane, you could meet a helicopter, or you could meet a windshield on the highway.
Yeah.
Like the bugs.
Oh, that scared me
in
one
the
time.
summertime. So, well, and you will hit birds too from time to time. It happens. It's unfortunate, but it does. I have to wonder if they're not engaged in some kind of kamikaze run. Because sometimes it just seems on purpose. In any event, in a free society, if you don't like your life, fix it. But it's hard. Yes. Freedom is hard. It's much easier to be taken care of like your livestock. It's much easier to live the life of a slave in the sense that you don't have to worry about anything. You're told what to do, you're provided for, that's it. You just have to bear up and do it. But in a free society, if you don't like where you're going to college, change. If you don't like what you're planning to do with your future, change. If you feel like you screwed up a few years ago and you ended up in a job you don't want or in a place you don't want, quit and find another one. You are the captain of your destiny. And if your ship runs aground, wait until the next tide and get your ship off the sandbar. This victim stuff is ridiculous. You're free Americans. Do right by yourselves. Or don't. And waste your life complaining about other people. And if you doubt that it's a waste of life, look around. See the world, see the adults around you, see those who take responsibility, and see those who blame their lives on other people. You decide who's wiser and who's happier. I know what I think. So, with all of this, in the Middle Ages, you were put there at least by a loving God who cares about you and who wants you to be a good person, which is better than being put there by an accident of birth in a Darwinian universe where the Communist Party tells you everything. Now we're going to focus on England in the time of Robin Hood. England in the time of Robin Hood is sort of a vague period because there are Robin Hood legends that span about 200 years. Some of the Robin Hood legends involve Prince John, and some of them involve King John, and some of them involve an entirely different monarch 100 years before or after King John. You cannot have all the legends of Robin Hood be true. He's in different places. Sometimes he's in Sherwood near Nottingham. Sometimes he's in a different place in time. Why? Because even more than King Alfred, or at least as much as King Alfred, I said that wrong. Even more than King Arthur, or at least as much as King Arthur, Robin Hood is clearly a myth. A man who robs the rich to give to the poor? Who would follow a guy like that? If you're taking the risk of robbing the rich who have bodyguards, who have the law on their side, who will send men to chase you down and kill you, yeah, you may give a little bit of your winnings to the poor who you love, like your family or friends or whatever, but you keep most of it. Robbers work for a living. They're not rich. They can't afford a lot of charity. So the idea of a thief or a brigand or a robber or a rebel who sticks it to the man and robs from the rich and gives to the poor, it's a great legend. But is it possible? I can imagine an individual becoming a Robin Hood. I want to be noble and free my people. I'll rob from the rich and give to the poor. Good for you. You try finding the kind of rough men that you need to rob the rich, who will work for pittance, while you give all the profits away to a bunch of undeserving, lazy, poor people who don't do a damn thing to care for their own fate. In reality, it doesn't really work. But it's a great legend. And even in the age of film, just this 100-year period, how many stories of Robin Hood are there? There are comedy Robin Hoods. There are animated Robin Hoods where Prince John, I think, is a weasel and King Richard is a lion. And I think Robin Hood is a fox. Yeah, fox. Because he's clever, see? That was the Disney version. There's Robin, played by Errol Flynn back in the 40s. There's Robin. You're going to see a Robin Hood movie in a little while. So let's look at some of the characteristics of the classic mainstream Robin Hood legend. The time of the Normans continues. William's house has passed to a new group called the Plantagenets. I'll spell that for you because it's a long word. King Richard and King John are Plantagenets. 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 You see, very few people writing it down. And I sincerely doubt you're going to remember Plantagenets just from your memory. Plantagenets. Plantagenets. The Plantagenets are a French family that took over Normandy and England when William's dynasty fails. So, I think they're also from Anjou, so they're also called the Angevins. In any event, this royal family is deeply involved in France and later the Crusades. Now, King Henry II is the father of both Richard the Lionhearted and King John. Henry II has an amazing wife. You ever want to study a woman in the Middle Ages who's great? Study the mom of Richard and John. Her name, Elanor of Aquitaine. Now, Elanor of Aquitaine is the inheritor of the Aquitaine. The Aquitaine is this region of France, southwestern France. It's really wealthy. It's really a beautifully rich area. And with Normandy and the Aquitaine, Henry II is going to have a real chance of taking over France. He also has the wherewithal to rule England, to threaten Scotland, and to do a bunch of other stuff. Henry II is an extremely active king. Now, Elanor had previously been the wife of the King of France. And she even went on crusade. She told stories in her old age of her going bare-breasted at the head of a crusader army towards Jerusalem with her first husband, the King of France. Like some Amazon Boadicea. Boadicea, remember, was the Celtic queen who fought the Romans. So this is an unusual woman from the Middle Ages. She's got confidence because she's really, really, really wealthy. And she's also very smart. So she, after things don't work out with the King of France, marries Henry II of England. Elanor and Henry have these children. How deep will I go into it? Oh, sure. Henry II has another famous story about him. Okay. Before Henry gets married to Elanor, he loves the ladies. He actually loves going around England and finding the most beautiful women with his best buddy, Thomas à Beckett. He and Thomas à Beckett were wingmen. They were bros. And I can't do this lingo. I'm trying my best. They were young men out for the women. And they found many of the women, some of whom were married, some of whom whatever. So these young men, they drank together, they wenched together, that's what you call it. You call it wenching back in the Middle Ages. And Henry has problems with the church. The church and its privileges irk Henry. It's his kingdom. And yet the church has its own courts and its own land, and the church is a competing power with Henry. And if there's a person running from Henry's law, they can run into a church and claim sanctuary. And there's all sorts of problems that Henry has with the Archbishop of Canterbury and the church. So, the Archbishop of Canterbury dies. Henry decides, you know what? I'm going to put my best buddy, Thomas of Beckett, in charge of the church in England. I'm going to make him Archbishop of Canterbury. Woo! So he does. He expects the Archbishop of Canterbury to do everything he wants the Archbishop to do. Back the church off, make the church more subservient to the king, allow the priests to be judged in royal courts, maybe even pay a few taxes, do things that the church traditionally refuses to do. But the thing about Thomas of Becket is when he's in the position of Archbishop of Canterbury, he sees the other side. He sees the benefits of having a strong and independent church to balance against the king. He is persuaded to start saying no to the king. Oh man, Henry feels betrayed. Becket was his buddy. Becket was his man. Becket was his pick. Becket was going to make things right. And now Becket is making the same sorts of troublesome noises and resistances that other archbishops do. So, one night Henry is deep in his cups. He's drunk as a lord, as they say. And two blood-stained Norman knights, fresh from the Crusades, are drinking with him. He's welcoming them home. And in the midst of his morose drink fest, he says, "Who will rid me of this troublesome priest?" And then he passes out. Clunk. Well, the knights, fresh back from the Crusades, look at each other. Was he just giving us an order? Yeah, he must have been giving us an order. So they go to the Archbishop of Canterbury's cathedral and home. And they find Thomas Becket. Ding, 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 ding. And they kill him. Dead. The king has ordered the murder of the leading churchman in England. He's going to be excommunicated. The church is going to be at open war with him over this. And even his own barons are shocked. That's not how you play the game. That's like finding the toughest adult in your family and mouthing off to them just to see if they'll whack you. Trust me. If they're the toughest member of your family and you mouth off to them, they'll whack you. That's the job they have. My God. So when Henry realizes what happened, he immediately apologizes, says he was drunk, said the knights misunderstood him. He was wrong, he's sorry, and he promises to give the church a whole bunch of concessions, including once a year on the anniversary of Becket's murder. Henry has to go to the church at Canterbury, strip down to his waist, and allow himself to be flogged in public. The King of England, beaten, to punish him for making naughty with the Archbishop of Canterbury, which makes peace. But this is the kind of man Henry is. He is a man of action. He is not somebody who is too troubled by worry. And he is a good match for Elanor of Aquitaine, who is really too much woman for most men. She was. Look around. I'm telling you, she'd be a great topic for a case study. So, they've got sons. Their eldest son is Richard. And Richard likes to fight, and he likes the boys, and he's probably a homosexual. He never gets married, and he is a natural warrior, a natural war leader. I'm not joking about the other thing. It seems to be very clear. There are some middle sons. And then there's the youngest, John. Now, Prince John is called John Lackland because he lacks land. He's the last of the sons. He's not going to get the kingdom. He's not going to get a big part of the kingdom. He's not going to get a big job. Also, John has an unfortunate personality. He has an unfortunate nature. In addition to being the youngest son of a great king like Henry and a great queen like Elanor, and he's got his older brother who's constantly, winning athletic trophies and beating people up, including John. John is naturally obnoxious. He is the kind of person that just has negative charisma. In fact, in the play, The Lion in Winter, which I've been trying to get Ms. Fleming to conduct here for years, and she keeps finding better things like Chekhov. John is to have said at a family gathering, "I'm so unpopular that if I was on fire, no one would so much as piss on me." That's unpopular. So, this is the family. And when Henry and Elanor die, Richard is king. But Richard barely spends any time in England. Instead, Richard goes on a great crusade with the Holy Roman Emperor Frederick Barbarossa and I believe the King of France. So they go to the Holy Land, and Richard ends up in a series of battles with the great Kurdish general Saladin. It's the most active phase of the wars of the Crusades in the Middle East. You've got two top-notch medieval generals, Richard for the Christians, Saladin for the Muslims, and it's an epic tale. But eventually, Richard realizes we're not going to recapture Jerusalem, and I've got other things I want to do. So Richard leaves the crusade to go home. And then he's kidnapped and held in Austria, in the Holy Roman Empire, for ransom. They're not going to let him go unless England pays a huge ransom. Now, is this the sort of thing you do to somebody who's gone on crusade? Well, it is if you have somebody as rich as Richard. So his name is Richard. Figure it out. So, Richie Rich. So, who's ruling England in Richard's place? His younger brother, Prince John. And a lot of the Robin Hood myths are set at the time when Prince John gets the word that his brother is captured and they're holding him for ransom. And he says, yeah, we'll get around to it eventually. Sure. I'll work on paying the ransom when I get around to it. Mañana. It's not an English word, but he understands what it means. Mañana. Eventually, when I get around to it. Why? Because John is ruling England. He's in charge. Richard's nowhere around. He gets to do what he wants. Why would he want his obnoxious, beat-up bully older brother back? John. This is an unpopular decision. And ultimately, John has to pay for his brother's release. And his brother comes back, and the end of most of the Robin Hood myths is that John is humiliated, and King Richard puts things right. Everyone has a happy ending. But Richard doesn't spend much time in England. In fact, he dies in France. So John becomes king in his own right. And he's the only English monarch with that name. No one else is named John. Why? Because, oh my God, his rule is a disaster zone. He manages, John does, to get everyone simultaneously so mad at him that they all want to overthrow him. Now, that's a difficult thing to do. That's like having a dozen friends in 3 or 4 different groups. You got friends at school, you got friends at church, you got friends at 4-H, you got friends in your neighborhood, you got family, whatever. You got 4 or 5 groups of friends. And they are isolated from one another. So if you're having trouble with your school friends, well, you've got your church friends, your neighborhood friends, your family friends, or whatever. But to get every single one of your groups of friends mad at you at the same time, that requires effort. You got to work at it. You really do. Because most of the time, once you've made a friend, even if you don't see them very often, they're basically well disposed towards you. You actually have to go out of your way to be obnoxious to them, to mess with them, to anger them, so that they are sick of you and they're going to want to have reprisals against you. Well, John does this. First of all, when Richard was alive, Richard did not appreciate John holding back on the ransom, nor did he appreciate the fact that when Richard was away, John basically acted like, not, I'm filling in for the King of England, but while Richard's away, I am the King of England. That's like if you have an older sibling and your parents leave for the night and your older sibling is put in charge of the kids like he's a babysitter. And your older sibling starts acting like one of your parents. Now, I am the older sibling in my family, so I thought my sisters were whiners when they complained. Yeah, you're not Mom. No, I'm not.
I'm worse than
Exactly. But it's not the same thing. You're really not the parent. You are filling in for the parent. You're acting in loco parentis. So Richard never really trusts John after that. He thinks John's a schemer. Now, the Pope. The problems that Henry had with the Roman Catholic Church in England do not go away. They continue. The king wants control of the courts, the church have separate courts. The king wants control of the land, the church have their own lands. The king wants more in taxes, the church doesn't pay taxes. The king wants everyone under his command, the church is above the law. If the king is pursuing a prisoner, he wants to capture him, the church might offer him sanctuary. So John expels all the senior clergy from England. And the Pope excommunicates John. Now, excommunication is a term you're going to hear again and again. But we might as well figure it out right now. Let's see, what's a good color for that? How about
pink?
Blue. Blue. Sorry, Dan. Write it down. EXCOM. Is it 2 M's?
Yes.
Yeah, 2 M's. UNICATION. See, I listened to you just as if you knew what you were talking about. That's great. You probably do. I know the word communication has 2 M's. So why not? Let's have excommunication with 2 M's. Oh, I'll even look it up on the magic box.
3 M's.
Let's see. 3 M. That's a company. It makes Post-it notes, among other things. So let's look it up. Don't snap that off. Golly, golly, don't be a nasty little Firefox. Be a good little singer. You use Firefox? That's so obnoxious.
Firefox is the only thing to use.
Because I'm old.
Firefox is the best. Good job, Dave. Okay.
I still use it because I like it. I got comfortable with it. Yeah! 2 M's. Whoever said that. Smart. Smart. Okay, here's what excommunication is. The Pope bans you from sacraments and casts you out of the church. You are no longer to be given aid or comfort by the Roman Catholic Church. Now, this is kind of important. The way you become king is by taking a holy oath during your religious coronation. Kingship is a religious office appointed by God, supervised by the church. You don't crown yourself unless you're the Corsican Napoleon Bonaparte. You are crowned by a senior cleric, by a churchman, by a priest. And when the chief priest of the Christian faith in the West, the Pope, says you're no longer a Christian, you're out, what does that mean to the oaths that everyone has taken to obey you? You are king because you have agreed by God to serve him and rule the land in his name. And now the church has said, you're not really the king. So suddenly, it becomes very hard for John to rule because the basis of John's power is a holy oath, and the church, which supervises and monitors that oath, says he's violating it, so he's out. What that does is it calls into question every oath to the king that everyone in the kingdom has sworn. This is a big problem. But that's not all. Because John is fighting the King of France to control France. So at the same time that the Pope has excommunicated John, and John's at open war with his own church, John also needs to send armies to France to fight to keep control of his lands and to try to take more control of the French lands. And the thing about England and France in the Middle Ages is they're well matched. Okay? France is not a pushover. France is a serious opponent. So, John has a problem with Richard till he dies. John has a problem with the Pope. John has a problem with the King of France. But that's not all. Because John also is a guy who plays favorites. You know, teachers' pets. People who, when you're in elementary school, give the teacher an apple and they never get in trouble and they're always picked for the fun things and they're goody little two-shoes. Goody little two-shoes. Some of you may be the teacher's pets. That's not a bad job, I guess, but other students resent it. They do. They resent it. They're not happy because they don't think it's fair. John plays favorites. John has favorites. And what that means is, if you have a dispute with one of John's friends, whether or not John's friend is right or wrong, the court will rule in John's friend's favor. If there's a property dispute, John's friends always win. But it's more than that. To pay for the fight against the Pope, to pay for the fight against France, to pay for his own lavish lifestyle, John has raised taxes on everyone to the point where it's difficult for people to pay. That's a problem. If the king is demanding that you give a bigger and bigger check or amount of food or amount of money, that's less for you. If you're paying in food, you could conceivably go hungry in order to pay the king's tax. And people were. You could conceivably lose your family legacy, your treasure that you're supposed to take and enlarge and pass on to your children. But what's the tax money being spent on? Not just the army in France, not just fighting the church. The money is spent on a lavish court lifestyle where the king gives rich gifts to his friends all the time. All the time. Why? Because John, one of his weaknesses as a person, seems to be he likes to buy his friends. You know, you have a rich friend and they constantly give out rich gifts that you could never pay back, and it somehow puts you in a situation of obligation. Now, some people can handle that. Some people can handle having a rich friend and not being messed up by it. Some people are good at being friends, even if they're rich. You know, they give a gift, it doesn't mean anything. It's just they happen to have more to give, so they give more. It's not a big deal. But sometimes you have rich friends who are insecure. And they'll give things to their friends so that the friends will hang out with them. If they weren't rich, they're afraid they wouldn't have any friends. Well, that's John in a nutshell. So, the people of England have their taxes increased and increased and increased, apparently so that John can pay his friends with lavish gifts. It's one thing to sacrifice and even go a little hungry in order to protect the country from a foreign king like the French. It's another thing if you're standing up against a church that's wrong about things. Not that a lot of people think that. Certainly there are people in England who think the church is too much. Okay, that's worth sacrificing for. But it's really hard to find a human being who's willing to go without so their king can give a special present to their bestest buddy ever. That's hard to take. So, by making all of these enemies simultaneously, John's rule seems to be in real jeopardy. The barons are on the verge of rebellion. The King of France seems to be winning the war. The church's excommunication is placing John in even greater risk. The people are unhappy with him. When you're surrounded by enemies, if you can, turn at least one of them into a friend or a neutral. If you don't do that, you're going to be ripped apart. And John makes the calculation. He's got to pay off one of these groups. It's not going to be the Pope. It's not going to be the King of France. Because as dangerous as they are, they can't immediately overthrow him. The people who can immediately overthrow him are the barons, the noblemen of England, who are sick and tired of his guff. They've got troops in England. They have troops in his army in France. They have loyalty of their troops. And nobody knows what will happen if a group of knights and men-at-arms are part of a nobleman's contingent, and that nobleman says, overthrow the king. Will they be loyal to this king, or will they be loyal to their nobleman? That's a serious question, and John does not want to see it answered. So, John agrees to meet with the leaders of the barons at a place called Runnymede, a sort of wet, swampy field, on June the 15th, in the year of our Lord, 1215, where he hears the nobleman's demands. And he negotiates, but he agrees to give in to the nobleman's demands. What are they? Okay, basically there are two of them. First, John must admit something that no king wants to admit. Even the king is under the law. Even the king is under the law. Even the king is under the law. In France and elsewhere, the king is like a superhero. If the law doesn't bring justice, the king can say, to hell with the law, I'm in charge, we're doing it this way. Why? Justice. The king can negate the law, he can violate the law, he can override the law, he is not subject to the law. The king is literally above the law. Now that's not a bad system if you have a good king. The problem is if you don't. John is not a good king. John starts out his reign above the law. But at Magna Carta, John has to admit that even he is subject to the law. Ladies and gentlemen, this is hugely important. Here's why. If you are working inventively on a new idea, a new way of doing things, a gadget, a service, something like that, and you live in a nation that's governed by laws, you can find out how you can bring that idea to the marketplace while keeping ownership of it. If you develop the world's first magnetic identification holder, it's all magnetized, you want to make it and sell it in a town somewhere and become rich. That's part of the whole appeal of the free market. Anyone with the right idea can become rich. However, if you're in a place like France or the Holy Roman Empire or whatever, your local lord can say, yes, that is a great idea. I want it. I will give you a charter. You may produce your idea under my auspices. Of course, I will take a percentage of the cut of the profits, and I will decide what will be done from here with your idea. How fun is that going to be? You come up with a new way of doing things, and somebody with a title basically takes it away from you just because they can. But from 1215, from the time of Magna Carta, in England, the king is under the law. And eventually the barons are going to be under the law. And the more that everyone is under the same law, the more that a person with a new idea like that, if they follow the law, can keep control of it, can get wealthy as a result of it. It's still your idea. And it will remain your idea through process of law. No one can come in and say, it's mine because I'm king, because I'm a lord. It is mine. I'm going to take it because I'm better than you. It's mine. They can't do that. With Magna Carta, a stage is set for England to become the most innovative country in Europe. Stop banging things, both of you. Because with everyone under the same law, an inventor's creative property is protected. There are other things, too, that are good about having everyone under the law. So that's the first thing the king agrees to. He's got to obey the law just like everybody else. Second thing. Oh! The second thing is there are people next door making grunty noises.
I noticed.
If the king needs additional money to fight the French, to stand up to the church, to do whatever, he can't command it. For new money, money that's not already taken into account by taxation law, the king must go to the barons. Please, may I please have more money? This is why I want to have more money. Please. And when you are asking, people can say,
yes. No.
No.
Exactly.
And if they say no, tough to be you. So the king is agreeing not to simply say, I am the king, I command you to give me 25% more of your income. No. The king is going to have to ask the barons. And the barons might say yes. The barons might say no. And the barons might say, well, we'll give you a little under these conditions. Take it or leave it. And the king has to take it. What this does is it makes the king part of the kingdom, not above it. He's no longer a superhero flying around looking to right wrongs and do vigilante justice. The king becomes the chief law enforcement officer in all the land. So, this is going to set the stage for England to become free, because after a while, the assembled representatives of the barons and later the people will be called the talkie place. Parliament, Parlement, the place of parley, the place of talking. And Parliament will later take the place of the king in ruling England. Now, the last thing I'm going to say for today is that Magna Carta has a very important place in history. First off, within 2 years, Richard tries to violate it because he's beaten the King of France enough and he doesn't deal with the church, and now he doesn't need the barons, so he tries to basically break all of the agreements at Magna Carta, and he is not allowed to do that long term. So, King John eventually, really for good, has to accept Magna Carta for him and his descendants and his successors. So now the kings of England have to be under the law, and they have to ask for new monies of Parliament. This is a part of the history of freedom that leads to our Constitution. Let me remind you what it is. Hammurabi's Code: an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, a life for a life among equals. The king's law is proportional. It does not permit revenge. If you're found guilty, the worst that'll happen to you is what you were found guilty of doing to somebody else. The Decalogue, the Ten Commandments. I am the Lord your God, you shall have no false gods before me, and so on and so forth. Which includes, thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not steal, thou shalt not bear false witness, thou shalt not covet. All of these social laws that are going to make a basis for a decent society. The Athenian Constitution, where citizens participate in government. The 12 Tables, where everyone can see the law. And if they can see the law, legal trickery becomes more difficult. Here's the law, here's the standards of evidence, here are the punishments that are acceptable. We all are under it, patricians and plebeians alike. We are all subject to the same fairly applied laws. The Constitution of Rome's Republic, where you vote for people who have offices that have limited power, that have to cooperate with one another. The government is not set up to rule the people. The government is set up to serve the people. Justinian's Code, which recodifies Roman law and makes it more logical. Magna Carta, which places the ruler under the law like everyone else and forces the ruler to ask the people for new resources. Now we go ahead. There's the unwritten English Constitution that comes as a result of Magna Carta over the last 500-600 years, over the next, should I say, 500 or 600 years, until the 17 or 1800s. Now, part of this is the English Bill of Rights, which John Locke writes in 1689, making sure that Englishmen have rights that the government is obliged to protect. And based on Locke's ideas, Enlightenment principles that say God didn't create the king to rule over the people. God created individual people who set up a government to do a certain job. It's not God, king, us, like in the feudal social order. It's God, us, the king. The king or the ruler or the president works for us. If we don't like what he's doing, we vote him out of office. He is not the boss of us. He is our servant. The government is not the boss of us. It doesn't own us. We don't belong to the government. The government belongs to us. That's why every few years we get to vote for everyone who is an elected official in the government. And that's also why every elected official takes an oath of office to the Constitution that that flag represents. They are not in power to reap the rewards of being important, where everyone in the room has to stand up when they walk in. That's not what it's about. Our leaders are supposed to be there to serve us. That is what the Constitution says, and the Constitution is very clear on this. We don't serve the government. The government serves us. And that's what comes out of this. So, that's where we are today, and we will continue next time. I see no questions. You may talk among yourselves until dismissal. Thank you.